listen to this. All right, everybody. So welcome back for our 5th class. So I appreciate everybody being able to be here for the Multi-Generational Families Eating Well. We are finishing up our series with the Seniors Eating Well, the curriculum with lessons 8 and 9, talking a little bit more about dietary fats, as well as a kind of a new concept called the energy density, and learning a little bit more about that. This class is going to be on June 8th as well as June 10th. So if you're watching this past dated and maybe you're coming in and this is the first class that you have a chance to listen to, please go back and check out the links below for the first classes. And we encourage, because this is a grant funded program, that we do have 6 classes in this series. The final class is going to be next week, and that is going to be a wrap up. So I'm going to go through and each of the highlights of all the previous classes, we're going to go through. And especially if you have any questions for today, those are going to be very, very important to be able to go through and just share with me, so that if you have any things that maybe I haven't gotten to answer or you'd like more nutrition education on, we can go through those. And again, this is a grant funded program. So if you are new to us, please go ahead and take our pre-assessment for either the QR code here or following it in the link below. And this helps us to be able to be funded so that we can continue to provide this as a service for the rest of the community out there. As well, I always reiterate this because it is so important to me. Surprisingly, we didn't have any questions from last week, so I won't be going over any previous questions that anybody had. But for Martha is going to be taking care of our questions for today. So if you have any big ones, little ones, if you have questions about dietary conditions, or a friend had a question about something, anything that you have, I'm more than happy to do my best to answer them now. And then I'll do the research to be able to provide that for next week, which is going to be our final series of this class. So today, the first lesson is going to be on the dietary fats. A little bit of fact or fiction. We're going to just be going through and talking a little bit about this because fats are so important. A lot of times different food groups are demonized in our culture. Sometimes we hear the keto diet and people want to cut out all grains. So we talked a little bit about grains at the very beginning of the first class. This class specifically is going to be about dietary fats. So we have a little bit more of like fish, avocados. We always hear like, is it a good fat, bad fat? Many times people in our families, as well as our loved ones, have some kind of health condition. Sometimes they might be a little bit minor and they're just on the border, and sometimes they can be a little bit more significant, but all these conditions can be benefited by improving our dietary condition. And specifically, there are certain ones that are grateful for changing when it comes to our health, when it comes to dietary fats. But eating some dietary fats are essential, and it helps us to be able to become a little bit healthier if we are choosing the right kinds of fats and oils. So in this class, we're going to be talking a little bit more about what certain things that we want to just avoid, we want to limit, and then ones that we want to choose a little bit more of. So limiting things like saturated fats or more the animal fats, or if we're eating meats, just cutting off a little bit of the extra fat or reducing the amount of butter that we're using, eliminating trans fats altogether, the ones that are going to be the bad fats. We'll talk more, as well as trying to shoot for more of the oil-based or things like fish that will help us get the good fats that we're looking for, like the monosaturated fats. So today with this class, the goal of it is going to be helping us to understand, why do we care about oils or fats, and why is this concerning to us in our personal lives or in our family and our health in general. As well, where do we find certain types of foods, and where do we find these types of fats in our foods that we eat on a daily basis? And then as well, helping us to be able to understand not only the type, but also how much should I be actually incorporating into my diet each week. So today, it's like this format of this class has a little bit of a different one, where there will be a lecture as well, but there will also be kind of like fact or fiction. And so there will be a couple of questions that will be based off of just things that maybe people hear. And I want you to just ask yourself and give yourself a little bit of time and test your knowledge to see, do you believe that? Is that something that you've heard? And maybe you're trying to figure out, is what I know already true, or is it false? So that we can help to correct any kind of misalignment that maybe has happened throughout the era. So first question comes, diets high in some fats increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and certain cancers. And I think, I apologize, that was supposed to be the question is like, does this actually happen? Is there a correlation between cancers and fat? And there is. It is a true thing that when we consume more than 10% of our diet, and most of the time when we're not just sitting spooning fat, we're usually cooking with it. So if we're cooking our protein or we're having our vegetables, we're putting it in baked goods or any kind of thing, if we start to have more than 10% of our calories in a day from things like saturated fats, so solid fats like butter or Crisco or stuff like that, or things like trans fats, baked goods, and maybe even artificial creamers that are in coffees, can increase our risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer. And so we just want to make sure we're getting less than 10% of our total diet from these types of fats. So we want to decrease that amount. Okay. Question for you is, eating too much fat causes weight gain, and specifically it raises bad cholesterol. So if I'm eating too much fat, does that cause me to gain weight and raise my bad cholesterol? Is that something that maybe you've heard in the past? And I really want to focus on this one because this one I hear a lot of, and we just want to make sure that people know whether that's true or not. So we already talked about the last one was fact. So this is going to be into us gaining weight. And the question is this a true statement or not? Does eating lots of fat or just fat in general cause us, because I've had a lot of correlations where I've heard people say, I have to avoid all fat altogether. So I have to just have everything cooked with lemon juice, or I have to get rid of all oils or because they're bad. And just know that we do need a certain amount of oils in our diet. And so this is actually on both of those parts of the weight gain as well as the bad cholesterol. It's fiction, that it doesn't necessarily cause us to be able to have this gain weight. It's gaining weight specifically comes when we eat too many calories. So it's not because of a certain type of food. It's not because we eat grains and now we're gaining weight. We eat oil or we eat fat and now we're gaining fat. That's not how our body works. We gain weight because we're eating too many calories. And so that is just something to just overall be aware of. As well, eating some types of fats does have a negative effect on our health, specifically when it comes to cholesterol. And that can be a correlating factor to heart disease, but not all. So there are certain types of things. So if we are eating more fried foods and fries and a little bit of baked goods and creamers, those are all going to be a little bit more on the saturated fats or the trans fats. Those can affect our cholesterol, but not all fats. So in a way, there's kind of like the first part of this is yes and no. If we have too much fat or too much oil in our diet, yes, this can make us gain weight because it's calorically dense and it can cause us to have too many calories in our diet. The cholesterol, it's true and it's false. Yes, it can affect us if we're eating the wrong kind of oils and fats, but it can also be very beneficial if we are having the good kind of oils and the good kinds of fats. So when it comes to what kind of foods would we best choose when it comes to our dietary fats in our lifestyles, the best one is going to be the unsaturated fats. So when we look at the back of a nutrition label, they'll usually have the trans fats and the saturated fats are usually going to be the first two, and they'll have unsaturated fats or monosaturated fats. Those are going to be the ones that we're going to be wanting to shoot for a little bit more often. And as you can see in here, we have seeds, we have nuts. Those are going to be a lot of times where we're going to be getting some of those unsaturated fats from. So things like oils, like canola oil or corn oil, cottonseed oil, olive oil, sunflower oil, or safflower oil. All of those oils are going to be a little bit more on the unsaturated fats. And those are going to be much, much better for our body and for our hearts as well. And don't be afraid of the things like vegetable oils, because most of the time vegetable oils are a blend of multiple of those things. They'll have a little bit of from vegetables, but it'll be from cottonseed, it'll be a little bit of safflower oil, sunflower oil, and it'll all be blended together. So if you like to have a variety of oils, the vegetable oil base is just going to be a great kind of variety. But when it comes to specific other ones, those oils are all fantastic when it comes to cooking. As well, just remember other natural sources of oils that we can get in our diets, not just oil-based that we're cooking with, but things that we throw into like maybe our salad are things like nuts, or if we're having olives or avocados, or we throw that in a little bit into like our dinners with fish or seafood. Sometimes those will be having a little bit higher in oil as well. So we can get the oil-based or we can get the food-based, but there are different types of fats that are going to be a little bit better for us to choose. And then also oils can be kind of hidden in foods that we don't always know about. So, or we don't always pay attention to. So things like oil-based dressings or just dressings in general will sometimes have that blended in to be able to give it a little bit more flavor. Things like mayonnaise or low-fat mayonnaise will sometimes have a little bit of oil, as well as things like margarine or any kind of things. Those sometimes will not have the trans fats. So those are going to be a little bit better choices than some of the others. So things just to be able to pay attention to when it comes to when we're looking in our house to be able to cook, or when we're going out to eat, what can help us out the most. But overall, the kind of the great rule of thumb is if it's solid at room temperature, it's usually going to be a little bit better for our blood cholesterol. And it helps us decrease our risk of heart disease. If it is solid at room temperature, think of like our body. If we're room temperature and we're warm, and it's a solid something, it's going to go into our arteries and our veins, and it's going to coagulate and kind of stick on the inside and narrow them a little bit more. And so what we want to do is try to prevent eating or overeating those types of things. I have seen in the last few years, even my parents, they received a thing for my grandma who has a little bit of Alzheimer's and dementia, and she's starting to forget. And they had this huge program on selling coconut oil. And I looked up all the research. As soon as I heard it, I was like, that doesn't sound right. It has a lot of saturated fats because coconut oil, the unrefined stuff, is usually solid at room temperature and it has higher amounts of saturated fats. And I looked it up and I couldn't find any research that could back that claim up. And it was a doctor who was just going off and he was selling certain types of supplements with coconut oil. And so be careful whenever you hear new things, because sometimes they aren't necessarily true. And for me, I always have to look them up. I always take a skeptical approach first and try to see if I can find the evidence to prove it. I'm not always trying to prove people wrong. It's just I want to make sure that there's evidence according to the recommendations that we share. But the evidence does show that having increased amount of these types of fats, so like the good ones that are maybe are the vegetable oils or liquid at room temperature or in the seeds or avocados, those can help decrease your risk of type 2 diabetes if you don't have it. And it's also beneficial for things like insulin levels and blood sugars for people that do have type 2 diabetes. So overall, it's a great benefit to not only our heart, but also people that are maybe at risk or do have diabetes. This can be a nice balancer. It kind of helps keep everything flowing how it should. So then the question is what is the problem when it comes to fats? Because there are some good ones, there are some bad ones. So the bad ones that we want to be able to just kind of be aware of, that are not bad ones, but just the ones that are not as ideal, are the saturated fats and the trans fats, because they can raise our blood cholesterol. So this is important for people that definitely already have high cholesterol, but if people are at risk of high cholesterol. So if you haven't ever checked it and maybe you talk to your family and find out, oh, Uncle Jack actually ended up dying of heart disease, maybe there might be a risk factor there. And so this is just a time where you may want to pay attention, just initially looking at your diet and saying, okay, I have a risk for this type of condition. I should just start looking at my chips. Should I look at the back of my chips and see, is this high in saturated fats, monosaturated fats? Are they trans fats? What are they? And look at just in the back of ingredients or what you're cooking with, how am I adjusting those into our diet? But again, we want to decrease the amount that we're consuming of saturated fats and trans fats. Trans fats, we want to have as little to none as possible. For saturated fats, we want to have less than 10%. So once we hit that 10% of our calories are consumed from things like saturated fats or fried foods or stuff like that, it is going to be increasing our risk for different things like obesity or type 2 diabetes, or especially some cancers can be increased significantly once we have a diet higher in that. So a lot of times when we think about the fast foods, not all fast foods are high in this, but quite a few of them do cook in that way. So we just want to be able to be aware of that. There are many different types of foods that have saturated fats and trans fats, and there's ways to eliminate them and find them as a cleaner source. So things like beef, pork, and chicken fats, as well as buttercream, milk fat, palm oil, even coconut. And I've heard a lot of, there's almost like some hype that people are like, oh, we're going to switch over to coconut oil, even though it has this and that, it still is high in saturated fats. As well as things, when we look at the back of it, if they say anything with hydrogenated oils, those are trans fats, or partially hydrogenated oils, shortenings, or even stick margarines. Those are all going to be a little bit higher in the saturated fats and trans fats. So we want to just be aware of that. Doesn't mean that we have to demonize having chicken or beef or pork or any kind of protein. It's just when we are cooking it, we may want to take the skin off of the chicken breast. If we fry it in the fryer and we get it nice and crispy, maybe just trying to maybe do it more of a less oil-based and cook it in a little bit of a cleaner manner. If we're having beef and we cook that nice piece of steak, cutting off the extra fat can just be a simple way to be able to help out. And if you have like a father-in-law or maybe a husband that really loves his steaks, just being able to cut this off can help out so much to be able to keep them healthy and keep them around in our lives a little bit longer. So switching over and replacing our saturated fats with unsaturated fats are going to be so beneficial. And again, this is just a great kind of visual to show what are the good kind of fats that there are out there. And again, there is a very strong evidence for research that shows that if we replace the saturated fats with the unsaturated fats, specifically the polyunsaturated fats, this is associated with reduced blood levels of our cholesterol. So it cleans out our tubes much, much more effectively, and it prevents the clogging from things that are like the bad cholesterol or the LDL. So a lot of times if as we get older and we get our blood work done, we'll see the HDL versus the LDL, and we want to kind of balance those out to make sure that the bad cholesterol isn't going up and we're just having a good moderate amount with not too much extra. As well, I don't want to beat too hard into this, but again, switching over to things that aren't just necessarily oils, but nuts and seeds, we can't have too much. So just moderation in all of these to be able to help us to be able to get a better diet all around. And sometimes these can give such great flavors and variety to when we have other things like our fruits and vegetables and our grains, make it taste so much better. And so finding out what your preference is, but also how to make a slow transition so your family can be a little bit healthier every single day. Now, many times our saturated fats are mostly found in meats. That is like animal-based. A lot of times if we ever think of like animal products of any kind, that's why switching over to sometimes there's a lot of research showing that a vegetarian or more of a vegetable-based diet or a plant-based diet is helpful because of this fact. Doesn't mean that you have to go completely 100% vegetarian or vegan. It just means that if we have a shift, that means that we're not eating as much plant-based. Because a lot of times in our American diet, the two things that are really easy to find are processed carbs as well as some kind of protein. And almost anytime you go to a family event, carbs and protein. If you go to a church event or you go to a business meeting, usually those are going to be the big things. And so finding ways to be able to increase our fruits and vegetables might be the easiest way to be able to help decrease eating all the other stuff, because we fill it up with the better choices. As well, think about not only the flesh of animals, but also the products of them. So like things like dairy. So even just by, I think we talked about this in a previous class, we can switch over from whole milk to even 2%. Making that shift over can improve your quality of life by decreasing the amount of saturated fats you're getting. If you go down to 1% or non-fat, switching up to, if you're doing that for yogurts or cottage cheese or even cheeses in general, that can help out so much because you're not getting as much of that fat inside of your diet. Now, trans fats, I have found that these can be very challenging to find in our labels, because in the back of, or in our labels and nutrition facts, most of the time there's a huge push of like demonizing trans fats a while ago, a couple of, I think like 10 to 15 years ago. And most of our nutrition facts, they'll always say 0 trans fats. And it's even if they have a small amount of them, if they have small enough amount, they don't have to show it. And so sometimes they are in the foods, but you don't see them. And so just be aware of that. They're generally found in things that are like stick margarines, as well as commercially prepackaged foods like frozen pizzas and different things like that that are already been prepared, as well as fried foods. The way that the heat cooks the proteins and the carbs, that oil is heated up and it converts it, and it can affect it and change it into a trans fat. So just be aware of that. Most trans fats are manufactured when they take stable oils and they are trying to make it have a better shelf life. And so they are just adjusting the properties to enhance the flavor of the food. And this can affect what we're putting into our body. So just be aware, if you're eating a lot of prepackaged meals, just make sure to look at the back of the label and see kind of where the trans fats are, if there's any. As well, coffee creamers or artificial creamers. Sometimes those really good creamers that we have that maybe are the dairy-free options, just look and see how much they may have. And sometimes they are a little bit higher of a source of saturated fats or trans fats in our diets today. And I know so many people love their cream and their sugar with their coffee or their teas. And so this is for all types of people. Just be aware of it. The tea, the coffee aren't always necessarily bad, but when we start adding a bunch of this stuff and we drink 3 and 4 cups in a day, those can have those effects as well. Then it's more of a diuretic as well. So just be aware of those types of things. As well, a main source in our United States diet today that we see a lot of saturated fats comes from cheese. We put cheese a little bit on everything. So if you have a dairy or a lactose intolerance, make sure that you're trying to not have as much cheese so it's not a poison in your body. If you are, just make sure to try to add, maybe go back to one of the previous classes where we talked about the herbs, switching out the salts, because cheese has a lot of salt, but it also has a lot of saturated fats. As well, things like meat. So lasagna, we're looking at this picture right here. This is a perfect example of things that might have quite a bit of saturated fats between the cheese that it's baked on there, as well as the ground meat. They can have quite a bit of an impact on our heart and other effects. And so again, is this a food to completely avoid? No, it's just a matter of, I wouldn't have an entire plate of lasagna and nothing else. I'd have a small plate of lasagna, like a small portion of it, and then add my fruits and vegetables, have maybe a salad, have something a little bit lighter so that I'm not overdoing it when it comes to the saturated fats. As well, healthy eating patterns can be in a variety of different things, but eating smaller amounts of certain things can help us to not have too many calories as well, to decrease the amount of saturated fats, the things that we're not wanting to get exceeding, again, that 10% in a given day. So on average, saturated fats or solid fats will have about 325 calories more than 16% of an individual's calories in a given day. So, and this is for an average person's diet, this is about where they're at. So if you think like, okay, I'm probably against the exception. If you're not trying to eat healthy, the average person, when they took a span of thousands of people, they found that the average person usually consumes about 16% of their calories in a day from saturated fats. And that's just, we have access to fast foods, we have access to processed things, we're on the go, we may be getting prepackaged meals. And so just be aware that this is a serious concern for dietitians, but just in general for the public, that we want to be able to help out with. And so by switching from those solid fats to more saturated fats, if we even just switch out one meal a week from prepackaged to we cook it ourselves and we know what kind of oils, we know what we're cooking with, and then maybe even just having a little bit extra and we freeze it, that can help us out to be able to keep us running healthier for a longer period of time. Even just making the switches from creamy based dressings to more oil based dressings, or instead of putting butter, I and my mom, we celebrated the Mother's Day a little delayed yesterday, and we went to a nice little restaurant and they had options for olive oil and balsamic vinegar. And they also have little circles of butter as well. And it was a nice restaurant. Which one do we choose? Do we choose the butter to be able to add to our bread, or do we add the oil and the vinegar? And so just be aware of kind of where you're adding certain things into our diets every single day. And again, we already talked about switching over for the dairy side to be able to help getting that lower versions of it. For this one, so if we have a person on a standard, so we look at the back of a nutrition label facts, it's usually based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. So how much of that is actually saturated fats? So when we say 10%, what does that look like in a maybe just a 2,000 calorie diet? If you're on a 1,500 calorie diet, maybe you're 15 or 1,600 calorie diet and you're an older lady, or you're a man and you're eating maybe 2,400 calories, this is just going to be a base kind of concept of when we have 2,000 calories in our diet, that 27 grams or about 5 teaspoons of oil are the recommended amount. So 5 teaspoons. So again, there's that 5 again, 5 fruits and vegetables, 5 grains every single day with 3 of those whole grains. Well, here's another 5 teaspoons. And that's not the big ones. Those are the tiny little teaspoons in a given day to be able to, they recommend for that's the amount of oil that we would want to be able to keep our body running nice and smooth and getting that help. Other strategies for lowering the amount of saturated fats that we can have is just choosing leaner options. So a lot of times we see like ground turkey or ground beef. We can look for the lower fat options and do like the 98% lean meat. Our family, we go hunting and we get elk. Sometimes we even have to add a little bit of oil to our meat to be able to cook it because it's so lean. But there are so many different ways to be able to just choose this, either if it's prepackaged or if we're choosing it already made into a meal. Try to shoot for the lower fat options that can be the lower saturated fats or the trans fats will help out. Next, we'll be discussing a little bit more about the flavor, but also the health benefits and the implications in our fat in our diet. And I like this one because this one can show like you can make some amazing foods and amazing flavors by throwing in and combining those herbs and those garlics and all the really good things that we have that are healthy. They have antioxidants. We can combine that. So instead of just having oil, we can use this as maybe a spread for bread instead of adding butter. And there are many, many benefits to be able to help in our life, but it really adds great flavor as well as a good texture to our foods. So fats are essential. So if we have been kind of avoiding fats for quite a while, just know that they not only can make things taste better, but there is a health benefit. So don't just avoid them altogether. There's just a right kind when we are using it in our diet. As well, not only do they have good amounts of oil and there's a correlation with saturated fats, but also like with anything when it comes to our foods, so like nuts and seeds as well as avocados, we're going to get a whole array of vitamins and minerals that are going to be in our foods. Specifically, a lot of times the fat soluble vitamins that we're going to absorb into our body that we need every day are going to be the vitamin A, D, E, and K, ADEC. Right? So vitamin A, vitamin D, so that's the one that we get from our sun, and it is very, very important. Vitamin E is an antioxidant, and it helps with our skin. And vitamin K is very important for things like blood clotting. We want to make sure that we are getting a good balance of these. Changing our lifestyle. So I have a friend who just had open heart surgery, and this is now his 4th or 5th, I believe, quite a few heart surgeries. And he is now, for the first time, so it was a genetic defect since he was a kid, but now he has a mechanical valve and he has to take warfarin. And luckily, he was doing a lot of really good things before. So he was eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. He was having a lot of good things in his diet prior to having the heart surgery. And when he had to go on to, I think it was coumarin or a blood thinner, one of the big things they say is you can't have a huge shift in things like vitamin K. So this is a fat soluble vitamin, but this is a lot of times we find it in our like our leafy greens. So a lot of times people are thinking, oh, I'm overweight, I need to lose weight, I need to get healthier. So a lot of times in the American diet, it's all about the leafy greens. Well, that has a lot of the vitamin K. If you have that big shift, it can actually be detrimental to your body. So you think, wait, I already have a heart condition and I'm told to be eating better, but if I shift my diet in a really hard way after taking medication, there can be a complication. So just be aware that as we have, this is now, right now, today is the best time to be able to make that shift to a healthier lifestyle, specifically today with the oils, because it's harder to make that switch once we already have a health condition. And if we do have a health condition, please talk to your dietitian or your doctor about how to make changes slowly and safely without hurting yourself, but also working within what you are doing right now. Plant foods and oils, like olive oil, as we see here, are a heart-healthy fat choice because of the high amounts of unsaturated fats, specifically monosaturated and polysaturated fats. They strive to be able to help us in so many ways, and we just want to make sure that we're getting these. And the way that we find out what the oils are that we're using, just go into your kitchen and just compare the different oils that you already have. So in your spray oil, I would be careful because the spray oils don't always show, because they always have such a small serving size. So they won't always show the honest amount per serving, because they'll say there's 1,200 servings, you don't know what you're really getting. But if you look at an oil vial and you can see that it is flaxseed oil or sesame oil, look at the back of it and just see, is it have higher in what types of oils? And just starting to recognize what you have in your kitchen. And then the next time you go to the grocery store, if you're looking at the oil section, usually they're up high, you can look at them and just look at the back of them and see, maybe I'm going to try just one new oil, something that could be different that I can use instead of butter, that I can switch out in my diet to be able to help keep my family a little bit healthier and safer. And again, looking at the back of these types of labels can help us out so much. So we want to look at the calories. If we're going to be, they've now made it a little bit easier for us in the new nutrition labels, that they are making adjustments. They're trying to make it more visual to be able to see how many calories are we consuming per serving, as well what kinds of fats are broken out into our diet. And so we want to look at that and say, okay, this serving in this one thing that has 6 servings in it on the right hand side has 11% of our total fat in a day. Okay. But we want to make sure that we're not getting too much saturated fats. So this one actually has 16% of our total saturated fats in a day. And that may be a little bit more than what we should be comfortable with. We're trying to shoot for less than 10% of saturated fats. And again, this will take some time learning how to be able to make these adjustments. Because if you're used to having fried pancakes and then having fried foods and donuts for dinner, like, it's going to be a little bit of a slow transition to be able to help get us to that next step. And I promise you that as we make small steps every single day to get to a healthier lifestyle, the goal is 10% or less. That is a hard thing to achieve sometimes for certain lifestyles or certain cultures. So look at your cultural inheritance. I worked with a young lady that was from the Philippines this last week, and she had a completely different culture. And her biggest fear was she doesn't want a white guy who's a dietitian to tell her that she can't eat her cultural foods. My goal is not to take away your culture. I just want you to be aware of what's in your recipes so that you can be as healthy as possible. And you can look through and figure out, what am I doing? There are apps, there are things totally online. You can ask me, you can send in a recipe, and I can easily spit out one of these for you. So you know when you're cooking, if you're making a homemade bread and you have no idea how many calories are in it, I can go through and I can break that down and let you see, okay, we actually have this much fiber and this much protein. This is how much fat we have it. If we adjust it now, instead of using this or that, we can see how those health benefits are affected in different ways. In the United States Dietary Guidelines, that is reviewed every 10 years. So the most recent one is from, I think it's every maybe 5 years, is 2020 to 2025 right now. The recommendations are overall that 10% is the goal, but not only from saturated fats. From trans fats, we want to get as little to none of this as possible, because again, there is no health benefit. So like saturated fats, our body can tolerate and we can process that. And that's why 10% of it, if there's just a little bit of that in our oils, we can handle. But when it comes to too much, or having the trans fats takes away all of the benefits of the good fats. So all of the oils, the olive oil that you consume, if you're trying to eat really good and you have olive oil with your breakfast in the morning, but then you have fried donuts, sometimes it's taking away from the good fats that we just consumed. So there is no safe or acceptable range of trans fats. So really of outside of allergies and things that may make us sick, trans fats are the only thing when it comes to what most dietitians will recommend as a bad food that we want to try to just stray away from as much as possible. And if you're already currently realizing I eat a lot of this in my diet, that's okay. Don't be too hard on yourself. You don't have to just make this huge shift and try to give up everything that you love. Just make slow transitions where you're eating it less and less. Even if it was just once a day, or then you cut it down to once every couple of days, that would be probably more beneficial for your heart in the long run. So in general, low-fat foods will be considered low-fat if they have 5 grams of fat per serving or less, and that's usually about the 5% of the daily value per serving. And so just know, like, just because something says it's low-fat doesn't necessarily mean that there's no fat. Just means that they usually have a less amount. So again, that 5 grams of fat per serving is going to be the considered that low-fat range. And just remember the same thing when it comes to um, things that have either margarine or partially hydrogenated oils or even salad dressings. Make sure to just look at some of those and look at how much there is and how much you cook with or how much are used in certain recipes, because we can easily add those and have a little bit too much in our diets. But you can also cut it back and have a little bit less to help us in our diets. There are great ways to be able to incorporate these fats into each of our food groups. So if we're having oatmeal, to be able to incorporate a little bit of nuts or seeds or nut butter to be able to have a little bit of healthier choices. When we have our cereals in the morning, nothing wrong with milk, just having that low fat kind can help out so much. If we are having things that are going to be more of like processed, that are like maybe biscuits, or going to be more of like baked good, like pastries, we just want to make sure to be aware that if we can have those maybe with the higher whole grains, that can be a little bit more beneficial as well, because we get a little bit more benefits to it. And even just switching out, instead of just having all white flour, having to do half white, half wheat, and give it a try and see how it is when it comes to cooking with those types of things. If you only do 100% whole wheat, it'll usually not be the most flavorful and most beneficial, and sometimes it can be a dry product. And so when you start playing with your recipes, switching just slowly over and seeing how your family finds when it has certain types of goods can help out a lot. And switching over from the oils to be able to switching into oils when you're cooking, maybe the ones that aren't as strong. So if you have a baked pastry, maybe if you add olive oil, may not taste the best. But if you have something that's more of a neutral oil like sunflower oil, family probably wouldn't even notice at all. As well, we already talked a little bit about making sure to cut the fats off of our meats, as well as extra skin can just be simple ways to be able to help us to be able to get rid of these in our diets. And in your links or in your emails, for everybody that's participating, Martha is going to go ahead and send out a great little handout, and this is going to help us to be able to determine good oils versus bad oils. And this is called the Making the Healthy Dietary Choices. So I encourage you to just go through and looking at this great handout. It has some good recommendations when it comes to, okay, how do I make maybe an adjustment in my food, and finding ways that you can make this adjustment in your lifestyle. I would encourage, like, if you found anything that was helpful in this section, I would encourage you to writing it down and trying to make that adjustment slowly in your family's lifestyle, because it's going to be those slow transitions that are really going to help us to be able to be as healthy as possible. That eliminating the trans fats, I encourage that as soon as you can. Or if you have to make donuts and you're going to be making them, maybe make them at home and cook them with your own oil. Maybe do it in a little bit healthier option. Switch out, maybe do half wheat, half white, maybe trying to do it as best as possible. If we do eat those, just try to decrease it as much as possible, and just being more aware when we're choosing our oils are going to be so beneficial. And so now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and just take a quick little 5-minute break as a little thing, and we'll come back at 10:51. And then we'll go into our last one about our energy density for foods.
Pamini, this is Marta. If you're listening, would you mind putting your email address in the chat? You can just do it directly to me, to Marta Malone.
All right, everybody. So we'll go ahead and start in about 45 seconds. All right, wonderful. So this is something that I really like, that this is a new concept. So a lot of times we hear about the grains, we hear about fruits and vegetables, we hear about oils, we've heard about herbs and spices and ways to be able to make our foods taste good. And a lot of those are kind of almost like a refresher course for our families in general. But this one is the concept of learning a little bit more about energy density, because a lot of times people are not as aware of like what this is, because this is a little bit more of a new research, and it helps us to be able to feel more satiety and more satisfaction with our food intake, because of the amount we consume has more volume but not as calorically dense. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this. This research actually comes from the curriculum that we are using from the Penn State University. Dr. Barbara Rolls has done a lot of research on specifically a book called The Volumetrics. And as well, she has backed it up with a lot of other research. And so there's been a lot on how can we lower our energy density when it comes to our foods, so that we are more satisfied with less calories. Because as we've shared before a little bit earlier classes, that as we get older, our energy requirements are less, because you think of little kids, they're running around, they're just they do circles around us. And as we get older and older, our energy output may not be as much. If we get into starting working out more, our energy may go up a little bit more, and we may need to consume a little bit more. But in general, from majority of people, as we get older, our energy increase decreases. So how do we consume the same volume of food but not as many calories? This is a great way as well. There's a lot of people in our culture today that are, even 72% of Americans that are overweight or obese, that are trying to control and maintain a healthy weight range. And this class, this lesson specifically helps us to be able to understand what foods we can choose, that may be little ways to change in our diet that is research based, that can help us to be able to make these healthy choices in just small, simple ways, that we can still enjoy the foods that we love, but doing it in a safe way. Okay, so of course it's easy to be able to compare okay, we eat lots of fruits and vegetables versus a burger. But our goal of this class is going to be really understanding what is energy density, and be able to define that and how that's affected us in our lives. As well, identifying what foods are a little bit maybe more calorically dense or less, and maybe shoot for maybe yourself trying to have 2 or 3 of these that you can identify right off site. And the first one's going to be talking a little bit about grapes versus raisins, and it'll be an easy way for it as a visual. As well, helping us plan, right? I think everybody's going to be frustrated with me to be able to talk about that, but planning out our diets so that we can have a healthy lifestyle, and getting more fruits and vegetables in our life. So what is energy density? So energy density is the concept of, if you look at the very top number, that's usually the biggest one on the nutrition label, is the amount of calories. And we divide the amount of calories by the amount of grams are in the food. And this usually will help us to understand. So like for the potato here, if we looked it up, the size of this potato would be about 150 calories. So 150 calories, and then the gram of it, the weight of it is going to be 100 grams. So it would be 1.5 would be the ratio of the energy density for a potato. And so what does that mean? Kind of as a rule of thumb, when we are looking at different types of foods, from potatoes to donuts to oatmeal or berries in the morning, what does that look like? If we're trying to be more satisfied, so what we want to do is get more volume for calories. So looking at the weight of what it is, usually those are going to be things that have higher in fluid as well as fiber and as well as other things. If it's a little bit more dry, it's probably going to be a little bit more calorically dense versus calories. So the rule of thumb is when you do the calorie over the grams, if it is less than one or just less than it, so if it's just less than one, it is going to be considered a low density type of food. So you look at things like watermelon, where it has maybe 80 calories for 250 grams of watermelon. That one's going to be a very low energy dense food because it doesn't have a lot of calories for the amount of volume you're getting, because it's 98% of it's going to be all water. But the other rule of thumb is when you're looking at it, the calories per gram, if it is higher than 2, so if it's twice as much of the calories per weight, then that is considered a high density food. So what we want to do is try to keep it, just be aware of what we're eating. So the things like the donuts are going to be higher in sugar, higher in fat, higher in oil. So it's going to be quite a bit higher as a high density food versus something like oatmeal or berries and stuff like that. So what are the things that can have a key components that will cause things to be low density or low energy density? And those are going to be the things with water, because water is just kind of, you can drink as much water as you want and there's no calories whatsoever. So water is always a big component. So fruits and vegetables tend to have a lot more of this as well. If I only am drinking maybe fruit juice, I get a lot more of the calories, but there's also a decent amount of volume. And so there may not be as big of a trade-off. But fiber is one of those, like we talked about at the grains lesson. Fiber is a non-calorie based carb that we digest in our body. It either goes and protects our heart or it goes through our digestive system, and we just go to the bathroom and we get rid of this extra fiber. But fiber is usually a big component of why things are held together, and they usually have a lot more calories or have a lot more weight to calorie ratio. And as well, how much air is in it. So if it has a higher amount of air, sometimes that can affect if it has more or less. So if it's a more of a fluffy dish, or if it has more air baked into it, that can affect the density of it as well. So looking at kind of, this is one of my favorite ways to visualize low density versus high density. So we have the same ingredient, the same product, we just have all the water has been removed. And so we look at a cup of raisins, we look at a cup of grapes. So in a cup of raisins, the first one, if we have it packed up nice and tight, it'll be about 495 calories. So a decent amount of calories. So most of the time we all eat the small little raisin packages, but sometimes they can come in a larger serving. And so if that is because all the water has been removed, it is really just sugar and a little bit of fiber in there. It's going to be 165 grams for a cup of raisins. So 495 calories for 195 grams, that is almost 3 energy densities. So it is considered very high. Versus something like grapes, we can have grapes, and if we have a whole cup of grapes, that'll only be about 114 calories and for about 160 grams of grapes. And so that one is less than 1, so it's 0.71 calorie, energy density, and that will be considered a very low one. So when you're, let's say, making a salad, are you adding raisins or are you adding grapes? If you're making a bowl of yogurt or you're adding things to it, are you adding raisins or are you doing grapes? A lot of times it's easier for like cereal companies to be able to just add raisins to things because it's a lot lighter and they just care about what's the weight itself. But when it comes to our weight and our health, it's sometimes better to be able to go more on the lower energy density and have it a little bit more with hydration and the fiber than it is more of the processed type. But therefore, if you wanted to be able to get the same amount of calories from these two, so essentially you're eating the same amount, the volume wise would be a quarter of a cup of raisins is equal to 1 to 2/3 of a cup of grapes. And I guess my question to you guys is, what is more satisfying, to have a whole cup of grapes or having a small amount of raisins? And doesn't mean that you can't have raisins. It's just a matter of we're getting this as a visual of how do we get maybe less calories for the same amount of time. This next one is going to be a great example, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, of how do we get maybe reducing the amount of calories in our diet. So let's just think about like a couple of things that may be able to meet this criteria. Um, so certain foods like smoothies with air whipped into it can help us to be able to have a little bit less, like it's going to be more fluff. Or if you're adding, or if we're making a smoothie, if I add yogurt or milk to something, it's going to have a lot more calorically dense. And so, or if I add ice or fruit and then I whip it up with a lot more air, I can get a lot more of the same volume and we feel more satisfied, the same satisfaction, but we're getting quite a bit lower in our thing, as well as things like having popcorn or fruit or vegetables. You can throw those in and be able to get this balanced out. But be aware if you're only adding things like milk and yogurt, that is quite a bit higher. And so just be aware of how much we do. Again, we're not demonizing milk or yogurt. We just want to make sure that we're getting the appropriate amount, but not overdoing those. Ah, this one is a wonderful one. This one comes straight from the recommendation from the book that Dr. Rolls actually had. And this was an experiment that she provided, and it was a chicken and rice experiment. And it went through and it had a group of people, and they were served 1 1/3 cup of chicken and rice casserole. So a casserole similar to this. And the participants on average usually ate about 392 calories in a given serving. Another day, the same group was served 2.5 cups of rice and soup, the chicken and rice soup, and they added about 10 ounces of water to the chicken and the rice casserole, and they made it into more of a broth, and they had it more in a different format. And each participant, on average, only consumed about 289 calories. So on average, and so that was the same group that got satisfied with the same ingredients and the same amount, was able to decrease almost 100 calories just simply by adding the amount of fluid. So sometimes things like soups can be a wonderful way. If we're adding water, if we're adding a lot of milk, it becomes a little bit more calorically dense. So just being aware of, you could just simply add things like that. And if hydration is already a hard thing for you, this might be a perfect way. Similar to the smoothies, as we saw in the previous slide, adding water or ice to it to make it a little bit better of a texture, fluffing it up with a little bit more air, or having the fruits in there, that can help make it a little bit lower calorically dense, even though it's a liquid. And it's just amazing that we can take almost a very similar thing, add a little bit of water and the herbs and spices, get all those benefits that we talked about in a previous class, and you can save simply 100 calories by feeling so much more satisfied. And in some cases, the people felt even more satisfied because they had more fluid in their body. And so there are multiple different ways to be able to play with our hunger and satiety to make sure that we are not having to always consume the most calorically dense foods, but we can get a little bit more of the nutrients without as many of the calories. So again, you can get the same amount of protein, same amount of carbs, just maybe a little bit less, more volume, less of the calories itself. Another example that they had, and I thought this was a wonderful experiment, was the pasta experiment, right? So a lot of times we always cook our pasta just with like mac and cheese and that type of stuff, and we just kind of put it in the box and make it really easy as possible. And in this experiment that Dr. Rice Roll had, she got a group of women and served all of them pasta with a side salad with varying amounts of vegetables that were mixed in with it. So like as we see with the tomatoes and the like the herbs as well as the asparagus it's mixed in with the pasta. And so they had it doing varying amounts. And at each of the experiments, they found that they had around the same amount of volume per day. However, on the days that they had the lower energy density, so they had more fruits and vegetables in it, they actually ended up eating 30% less of the calories than the days that had more pasta. But they both felt full, they both felt satisfied, but one consumed almost 400 calories less than the other one did. And it was just simply by the ratio of the fruits and vegetables, the vegetables that was mixed in with this pasta dish. And so I'm not saying that you have to go through and just do this with every dish, but how amazing would this be is to just simply make small adjustments to the things that your family already loves and they enjoy. And if you need, just make a list of like the fruits and vegetables that your family does enjoy and just incorporate these into a good way to be able to not have to consume as many of the high density calorie foods and convert it into a low density calorie food. Because a lot of times we eat pasta and we feel like, oh, we have to, it just maybe is not such a good thing. I know my mom has been on quite a few diets and a lot of people have, and pasta is one of those big red flags that they always tell you to avoid. Well, you throw in a little bit of protein and you have a complete meal here, and that would be a way to be able to help lose weight, but also decrease the amount of fat and energy density all in one go by decreasing the amount of calories that we consume. Therefore, if we increase the usual volume that we eat, yet we decrease the amount of density, we are going to get less calories and we're going to feel more satisfied and we're going to help us lose weight. And I just think that's kind of a win-win all around. I think a lot of times people have the diet mentality of if I need to lose weight, I have to eat less. You do, but you don't have to eat less volume. You can still eat the same amount or more volume by adding more fruits and vegetables, more water, and more of that to be able to help you feel more satisfied, but without having to be gaining as many of the calories. And you could just make this with small little shifts in your food every single day. So just think of maybe let's just do a baked potato. Okay, so we get half a baked potato and we put a tablespoon of butter, right? So the energy and density of this, we calculate it all out and would be 1.9. So it'd be not quite 2, so it's not quite high, but it's not quite low, so it's just somewhere in between. We get 3/4 of a baked potato and we add 2 tablespoons of sour cream. So instead of it being butter, it's sour cream, has less of the cream. It's now only 1.2 grams. And then if we have the entire potato, right? We eat the whole thing, but maybe we don't add any of the goodies on top, just maybe some fresh herbs and stuff, that ends up becoming an energy density of 1.1. So we can eat more volume of the potato with less of the calories because it's like you're getting more of the energy, like it's lower energy density rather than the high energy density. And I guess the question to be able to ask the group and ask yourself is, what could you do with the potato instead of adding butter or instead of adding sour cream that you can keep it at a lower energy density and you can keep the volume a little bit higher so that you feel more satisfied? Maybe you can try throwing salsa on it. You can add broccoli and mix it up with the potatoes. We can add maybe low fat cheese. There's multiple different ways that we can add and adjust what we're eating to be able to do it. If our family has always taught us a one way and we always have to have steak and potatoes, I get it. But if our family have all died of heart disease, maybe we want to make some adjustments. I love certain types of cultural foods, and we just want to make sure if certain cultural foods are a little bit harder for us to consume, what it is we just eat those a little less often or pair them with things that are going to be a little bit more beneficial for us. Oh, the baked goods versus fruits, right? So energy density, bottom line is if we want to lose weight, this all comes down to calories in, calories out. So if we can adjust however many fruits and vegetables we're eating versus how many cookies we're eating, or just choosing to be able to have a little bit less of the high energy density foods and go to the lower energy density foods like the fruits, that will help us to be able to control our weight, to manage that and just keep us a little bit healthier, but feeling more satisfied in the long run. So again, this is just kind of an overall bottom line, kind of a little base understanding. So if we have very, very low energy density foods, those are going to be the things that are going to be more like the fruits and vegetables, skim milk, broths, things like that are going to be very low. The low kind, they're going to be a good choice that are going to be a little bit healthier for us between 0.6 and 1.5 are going to be things like our whole grains, cooked grains in general, cereals. We have our low fat milks. So the first one was skim milk. Now we're getting to the low fat milk, as well as things like beans and legumes. Now we get into more the medium range that can be a little bit higher, is going to be 1.5 to 4 energy densities. And those are going to be like our proteins. So our proteins, our cheeses are a little bit more of the mixed dishes as well as the dressings. And then we have our high density. So those are going to be the things like the chips and the crackers, the things that are going to be a little bit more dry that are going to give us a lot more calories per it. And again, not foods that we have to avoid. Just be aware of how much we're eating of it, and trying to fill up what we're doing on the low to very low end, staying a little bit more in the meat and more the medium side, and just a little bit less on the high side. So what we want to do is just kind of know when it is appropriate to be able to eat certain types of foods, so we're not overdoing the foods that are a little bit more harmful to us. And I would just encourage, like, this could be just something that would be kind of fun for your kids, just to have them go through and look at the back of it and say, okay, is this like almost like a red light, green light, yellow light kind of thing? And you can say like, okay, is this a green thing that is really good and it has a very low energy density and we can eat this all the time? Or are these the red ones where we want to just stop, pause, look at how much we're eating and maybe eat it a little bit less? And this is time where you can just simply pull out your phone or your calculator. Most of the time you can see what two numbers are and you can compare them, and just figuring out if it's less than one, it's probably better. If it's between 1 and 2, it's okay. From 3, 2 and higher, it's going to be a little bit more than what we really want to do. And as well, just being able to be aware of what our common foods are. And I would just recommend, when you go through the grocery store and you make a list of your foods at home, just know what is the energy density, which ones are we wanting to be able to make sure that we're not pairing up in our family's diets, where we're having quite a few of the high energy density foods combined with other things. Like if you're having ice cream and then you're adding ice cream with peanut butter and then you're also having a cookie on top of it, that might be a really hard for the body. It might be hard for the family, and you might be more likely to gain weight with less satisfaction, versus having a piece of fruit and throwing in different things can be a little bit more helpful for us in general. And again, when it comes to satiety or being satisfied with our foods, I love the concept of intuitive eating. This is where my nutrition education started, was with intuitive eating. Is if we want to continue to be able to maintain a good healthy weight, getting a variety is always the best for our body, is to be able to help us to be able to decrease our risk of chronic health conditions or health diseases. If we have that lower density foods, those can help us to be able to maintain a healthy weight range and help us to be able to stay healthy as long as possible. But if you eat the same thing over and over, I was talking to my family about this the other night. My mom, like, she was raised with my grandmother that only had peas and carrots, and peas and carrots, peas and carrots. And it wasn't even the flavored kinds. It was just literally canned, drained it, put it in, popped it in the microwave, and that was their vegetables. And after a while, she just come to hate those. And she's like, I just don't like vegetables. But then I was able to expand and show her there's so many different things like the zucchinis and the squash that we can really enjoy, that have lower energy density, but have more flavor. But don't just stick with the one thing. Like, I have met several people that as I talk to them, they will always have so many apples in a day. And it's like, that's not always the most beneficial thing. Having a variety of fruits, having a variety of vegetables. When I say the 5, I don't want these all to be apples. If we have 4 apples and 1 banana, may not be the most ideal. So what we want to do is have a variety of all different kinds throughout our diet, because that gives us multiple vitamins, multiple minerals. It keeps us satisfied as we are enjoying what we are doing. I think that's what sometimes can happen. And research shows that if we will eat more variety, our senses are more satisfied. We are less likely to be able to need to have to compensate. I have seen many, many times where If people continue to eat the same thing every day, they start to then add a cookie with milk, and then they have to add 2 cookies with milk, and they have to add more to be able to make them more satisfied because they're not enjoying it. There are so many kinds of colors, textures, aromas, shapes. If something happens and like maybe you get COVID and you lose your sense of smell and taste, that's okay. That isn't the only way to be able to enjoy foods. There's textures, there's shapes, there's colors. There's so many different ways to be able to enjoy it. And then with that variety, you can see that a lot of times the variety of stuff will give us less energy density than other types. And as well, when it comes to understanding what our satiety is, so what our satisfaction level is, when you go into a meal, think about what your hunger level is and just rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. When I go into a meal, 10 being like, I am famished. I have been walking the desert forever. I've been working out in the field forever, and I am just so starving. Versus 1, I'm like, I'm not really hungry at all. And I'm not like, I just ate a big meal. I can't eat anymore. And figure out where your satisfaction level is. If you can keep it at a healthy, maybe 6 to 7 range when you're going into meals, and that's why snacks are so important, that can help you from overeating. If I get to the point where I'm at an 8, 9, or 10, anybody gets to that point, they don't really care what it is. They just start grazing, they start eating, and it's usually the calorically dense foods or those high energy density foods that we usually go to because they're quick and easy. Instead of having to go out and pull out a watermelon and cut a watermelon, we just go straight to the candy bar or the protein bar and we eat those, and those usually be quite a bit higher. And so what I recommend, trying to just document this. If you're trying to figure out how to decrease the amount of calories you're eating, but feel more satisfied in your daily life, just maybe take 10 minutes before you eat a meal and just look at how hungry are you and how full are you after you enjoy a meal. Are you feeling overly full? Are you feeling satisfied? And I'll tell you what, if you can get to the point where you're eating within a comfortable range every time, eating smaller, more frequent meals, you don't have to overeat. You don't have to see a plate of a buffet and have to eat everything that's there. You don't have to go on a cruise and have to gain 5 to 10 pounds because you're eating too fast and you have to eat so much and you want to eat enough of it so fast that you are overeating because you know you're going to be full. It takes about 20 minutes for your stomach to finally get the signal to your brain to say, you know what, I'm full or I'm not. And so being able to eat just a smaller amount and then just stop, wait 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and to be able to figure out, am I actually full or am I satisfied? And from there, if you need to eat more, enjoy some more. But most of the time, our body, we eat so fast, sometimes our body doesn't have the time to be able to catch up. So just give yourself a little bit of time before a meal, just sit back, relax, and just pay attention and say, this is that time where people will pray. If you pray, great. If this is the time where you could gather everybody together and everybody kind of grabs the last bit of stuff, think about how much and how hungry you are and just take the time to be able to just listen to what your body is doing. And this is just a simple thing that I always recommend. If you're trying to lose weight, just pull out a journal, begin tracking this so that you can start to see, how are you feeling? Are you overfull? Are you underfull? Are you hungry? Are you satisfied? Even your states of emotions can affect how you eat. So if you are super excited and you just celebrated a big victory and your kid just got to win an award, sometimes we celebrate when we eat more or we eat certain ways. Or if we're sad and we're depressed, we eat a certain way. So look at your state of emotions. Are you sad? Are you depressed? Are you stressed out? Are you anxious? Maybe are you mad or angry at somebody? Or are you just happy to be alive? Look at what your emotions are. So many times people start to eat maybe a little bit more when they're bored or they're lonely. And just think of those times that maybe is a little bit of a weakness of yours. And you can switch it up. And if you're not hungry, but you're actually just feeling an emotion, that's okay. Pull out a piece of gum, chew on that, and go for a walk. Finding ways that if it's not an appropriate time that you need to be eating and you've already eaten an hour before and now you're frustrated and you just want to go and have a Snickers bar, instead of going to that convenience store or the little candy convenient machine that's in your office, what you can do is just maybe switch it up and go and do a different habit. If you have a hard time with coming up with these habits, ask a friend, ask a therapist, ask somebody else that can help you. You can do things like reading or doing crafts, going for a walk, getting some kind of exercise. Always change up some of those things, because sometimes what we do is we get into a habit. If we have been stuck in our house with COVID for a long period of time, we will maybe start to graze more than what we like to. And people are starting to gain that COVID-15 or whatever, where they're gaining the weight. Well, how do we not let our emotions or just the availability of food all the time make us gain weight? And these might just be a couple of those little tricks that can help us in our daily life. So overall, just as a summary for what we've talked about a little bit today, is again, trying to choose dishes that are a little bit lower in that energy density. Think of the grapes versus the raisins, making sure that we try to get a little bit more of that, the water or fruits and vegetables, more of the hydrating that will help keep that energy density down. As well, maybe planning a few snacks that are a little bit lower in energy density. So instead of always picking the crackers and the peanut butter, which is higher in energy density, maybe choosing things that are a little bit lower in energy density, that'll be less calories and more satisfying for us. As well, choosing a variety so that we are not just eating the same thing over and over, but we're increasing our satiety and our satisfaction with our meals with lower energy foods. And as well, make sure to always look at the back of a nutrition label, or if you don't have a nutrition label and you have an amazing recipe, please, please, please share that with me. I absolutely love being able to see those, and I will share my contact information again at the end of this video and at the end of this presentation, so that we can try to be as healthy as possible. One of the other things that we have sent, or I just sent to you that from Martha, is going to be if people are struggling with weight loss, there's a 1,600 and 1,800 calorie diet plan that can help us understand how many fruits and vegetables, how many grains, what is the recommendation of oils per day. That is all onto a cohesive sheet that is going to be sent to you. And again, if there's any major questions, I just highly recommend you go ahead and put those in now, so that I can just finish this whole class series next week, going through and answering any of your questions. If I spent the whole time answering questions, I'd be happy with that, or else I can review all of these basic 9 classes in next week's class. Okay. Again, we are just grateful for so many opportunities to be able to use so many great tools and technology, as well as Penn State and all of their great research, and Dr. Rolls and her research on helping us to be able to learn a little bit more about energy density, but also providing this as an education for us. And again, this is the end of our series, at least the end of class 5 and the lesson 9. And we will be talking a review next week. And that last week is going to be important for us to be able to, again, we do the pre-assessment. And then after all of the classes, we recommend and request that you take the post-assessment, and that will be able to help you understand, am I making any type of lifestyle changes? So if there's any questions, if you haven't asked in here, you're welcome to screenshot this, take a picture of it if you need to know of a local dietitian, or you can share it with anybody that may be struggling as well. And I see a couple of chats. I just want to make sure if there's any questions, that I am talking those. Oh, hi, Brandon. I'm sorry. So Augustine. So I think Augustine is managing the chat for me. I appreciate that, Augustine. As well, I don't see any other additional questions, so we are going to go ahead and stop the class today. But I appreciate everybody participating. And if you don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead. Oh, I see a little chat. Yep, I just stopped the recording. And Amy, I didn't see that you showed up. Great to see you. And hopefully the class was beneficial. And yeah, we will be finishing up the series next week. If you want to be able to do that post-assessment again, it'll be the same link. It'll just be doing it on the second half. So thank you so much, guys, for coming, and we'll see you next week.